Welcome to episode 2, officially, after our previously recorded intro, which we did just now. We are reviewing The Wrestler. Can you remind me how to pronounce the director's last name? Aronofsky?
Yeah, Aronofsky, I think is right. I assume actually. I don't know.
Oh, I just wanted to check. So this movie came out in 2008, I believe. It has long since been one of my favorites. Mickey Roarke was robbed, I tell you. I think he deserved the Oscar for his very commendable, raw, real performance. He did not win, but he got my accolades. And I initially saw this movie numerous times from 2008 until 2009. I used to go to the public library, which was near where we lived, where we shared an apartment at the time in Koreatown in Los Angeles. And then I eventually found it on DVD form. Remember those? At a local Walgreens or Ding Ding. What is the other place? Maybe a Target? I believe it was Walgreens though, because for a long time they had really good selections of DVDs when they were trying to get rid of all the stock. And so I own this movie, and it continues to be one of my favorites. I've seen it numerous times. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I like you said, this came out when we were living in LA. It was 2008. I did not see this in theaters or really even when it was a new release. I probably saw it a few years later. People had told me, it's good. It's like he does a wrestling movie. I think the end was probably spoiled for me, but I've seen it a total of maybe two or three times. I don't think I've seen it a lot. It wasn't one that really stuck with me the way that you mentioned, having watched it more and having really thought about it and pondered over it. This one was sort of one that sort of came and went for me. I'm a big fan of the director. I'm a big fan of a lot of his work. And our previous episode, The Whale, I think he has certain character ideas that he returns to in terms of these isolated characters who go through a really intense defining experience. Black Swan could also be called that, and even his first film, Pi, could certainly be called that. The Wrestler, to me, it was a really interesting movie. It was just your takeaway and your thoughts on it that made me sort of reapproach it. And so let's dig into those themes that you suggested that you wanted to talk about, because there's certainly a lot here. There's certainly a lot of interesting parallels between Mickey Rourke himself, the actor, and the character he plays in the film of The Wrestler, and his career, having spanned many years and having really changed from when he was an A-list leading man to this kind of almost circus act that he was in this and that he is now. Um, there's a lot of really interesting parallels, and I think the film is certainly commenting on those parallels. Um, but yeah, what were some of the thematic things in the film that really stuck with you?
Yeah, well, just going off the last point that you had made, he really did. Okay, so I have an audiobook written and read by his ex-wife, his second ex-wife, Carrie Otis. She was well, not a supermodel, but she was a model in the late 80s, going into the early mid 90s. And the downward spiral during their relationship, which he really began to take, he had a traumatic childhood, and he did have his shining, I'm not sure how long, but he had some pretty remarkable roles in Angel Heart, Diner, movies that I actually never saw, but I know that he earned a lot of accolades and recognition and appreciation for those movies, and then just spun out of control. He was getting into arguments with producers and directors, and just he really took a different turn. And so the wrestler really does reflect that. He shows up in that movie after a long time of not being in anything really, and he looks a lot different. He's no longer a a noteworthy, attractive individual. He's still fit, and I'm sure he had to prepare intensely for the movie, but just physically, all the surgeries, and he looks like a wounded lion. It's unfortunate to see the real man, but also the beating that his character Randy took in the film, and where and when those two overlap. And I think that's why, at least in part, if not entirely, he was able to give such a authentic, raw, convincing performance, because in a lot of ways that movie really did reflect his own trajectory in life and his ability to come back.
Yeah, and I do think he's a very good actor. I want to say, in this as well as the other films of his that I've seen, I'm not a big, completionist of his. I haven't seen all of his films, but I've seen some of the classics and some of his newer work. I do think he's really good, and I think that his portrayal of Randy in this film is very, very deep and very felt. And I do think it's a shame, this was kind of a comeback for him, and he was around for a little while, but he's vanished back into obscurity. And I couldn't even tell you the last movie that he was in, or even the last 10 years, Um, it's kind of a shame. I think that he really could pull off an interesting character if he wanted to. And this movie, like I said, has a lot of parallels with his life. There's this idea of sacrifice, and there's this idea of performance, which I know really speaks to you. There's this performative aspect to this character. We see him getting this artificial tan, and we see him dyeing his hair, and we see how much he's dedicated to this persona that he's built, this ring presence that he has, even so far as to disassociate himself from his real name and go by Randy when his real name is Robin. I know that there's a lot of that performance aspect that you related to. Why don't you tell us about that?
So around the time that this movie came out, but more significantly for about an 11-year stretch, I worked in various hostess clubs, one primarily more so than the others. That was a 4.5-year stretch in downtown Los Angeles. And the converging of who you are playing can and will eventually become you if you don't already have perhaps a strong social circle and or a strong and stable sense of self, but also just the duration of time. I think it's pretty human to, when you're doing a very performative job and you're literally doing things to transform yourself. In my case, it was feminizing my look, and so that I would of course fit into the environment where I was. And so the process of the aesthetic focus upon yourself, but also the performative element of it, and the process that he goes through in terms of the tanning and dyeing his hair and obviously working out to maintain this physique. I had to do a lot of that too, and all the glamorization so that you can fit this role, which eventually becomes you in a sense if you do it for a long duration of time, and especially if you don't have a strong social group to return to. So in the movie, Randy was estranged from his family. He wasn't in a relationship. He in part of it was that he was so robust physically, But part of it too is that he didn't have a life to come back to. And if you do that for long enough, this job more or less becomes you in a way and becomes your own twisted family in a way, as it did for me. And so it can become very addictive, where the fake world or the manufactured, constructed world becomes your family, to the point that the rest of the world kind of moves on without you. And you forget how to, at least in a professional sense, do much of anything else. And so even sustaining a relationship with somebody outside of that environment, you forget how to do that as well. And so I had a lot of empathy for the situation he was in.
He's a really complicated character, and we're given this idea that he was a very successful main event level wrestler at one point. And it's an interesting idea of when you're doing something that brings success and you don't really, maybe you didn't expect it, maybe you did, it doesn't matter. But if you don't know how to compartmentalize and live your real life, then you're just going to lose yourself. And I think that here's a character that did that. He didn't really know how to separate himself from the person that he played, and he bought into the person that he played completely and went so far as to abandon the person that he actually was. And it's as far as changing his name, and it's as far as estranging himself from his family. And in the end of the film, he virtually sacrifices his life for this persona that he's built. And it's just this theme that immediately makes me think of is how do we, how do we create the version of ourselves that is successful? And when you have success, how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that? And also, how do you justify to yourself needing to think outside of that? Because it's very addictive. That type of success is very addictive. I haven't had it, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but I can imagine it. I think we're meant to extrapolate a little bit.
Well, didn't you a while back that you had done some stand-up comedy when you were living in California? Tell me about
Yeah.
that. Did you come to Los Angeles to do that, or were you elsewhere?
No, I went to Los Angeles and I took improv class for a month in 2017. And that was the first time I'd ever performed on stage live. And then that got me interested in improv. And then when I went back to the Bay Area, I started to do that a little bit more. And I went and performed stand up on one occasion. And yeah, I mean, the times that we see Randy in the ring, especially towards the end of the film, when he's really feeling that cheer from the audience and he's really feeling that adrenaline, that is almost the part of this film that I relate to the most, because there is no better high in the world to me than when you're performing in front of people and you get a reaction. When I performed in Oakland and did my second improv, I wish I could remember what I said, but I said something at one point that made like the whole audience laugh. And that was just the best feeling. I was on like a high for like 6 hours after that. And I can just imagine this guy who's got whatever it is, whatever that little personality quirk is that makes us as people want to put ourselves either on a camera or on YouTube or doing voiceover, like you say you want to, um, what are these things that are performances, and why do they speak to us, and what is the personality type that is drawn towards wanting to do this? I wish I knew, because I have it for sure.
You said that you don't have it or that you do have it?
I do, yeah. I've always liked performing, and I've always enjoyed being the center of attention. I actually, another thing I didn't tell you last time, I acted as a minister and I married my friend. My friend Max got married in Tennessee and he asked me to do the ceremony because they didn't want to have a religious ceremony. And so I went down. It wasn't a big group, but it was probably 30, 40 people. I went down and I led a wedding ceremony. And then after that, they were going to have like this whole after party thing. And I could see they needed someone to say, okay, now this is what we're doing. And okay, guys, so I grabbed a mic and I just completely winged it the whole night. And I was saying jokes and I loved it. I love performing that way. I don't know why.
And why was I not invited to be the flower girl? My question about that.
Yeah. I think because they didn't want you to like blast death metal at their wedding.
Oh, why not? I'll get my shot. I'll get my chance. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it really does take and necessitate and require a certain personality type to be able to going into wrestling, going into hostessing, where it's a very physical kind of job and it's performative and you're using a fake name and keeping your body in a certain type of aesthetic for visual purposes because you have an audience. In my case, it was different, of course, because I had one client or one viewer at one time. It was a social club and it was not performing for a larger audience. But it really does take a certain personality type, which not everybody has, of initially going into that type of profession, being able to compartmentalize and separate that self from who you are. Because during the years I did that, I saw many, many potential hostesses come in and, they'd be asking me, well, what do I do when he does this or when he says this? And they would last a week, if that. And I would just think, it's not formulaic. You're not working at the grocery store. I mean, you have to have a certain level of social intelligence to be able to be malleable and adjust your behavior accordingly. And obviously, wrestling is a more formulaic and socially acceptable type of job and type of performance, so to speak, where he did have to know actual moves and he did need to have actual physical trained responses for dealing with his component, but also at the same time, simultaneously and congruently reading the crowd, reading an audience, knowing what they wanted to see, and providing that. There were similarities, absolutely. And then if you're too good at it, you can enjoy it to the extent that that persona becomes you, to the point that you forget how to do much else. And that audience becomes your family. And that speech he gave at the very end where he states as much, it gets me every time.
Yeah, it's a really key moment because at this point he's lost his daughter almost definitively, and he's lost his relationship with the other woman, which we haven't even really mentioned yet. Marissa Tomei plays his love interest. What was her name? Like Nicole or something?
Well, she had two. Pamela was her real name, a
Yeah.
prettier name, in my opinion, but Cassidy was her stage name. And obviously there are parallels in their professions. She played a exotic dancer in the film and was his prospective love interest.
But his real life, like you say, I mean, his real life as depicted in the movie, he's living in this trailer park, getting eviction notices on his door. He's chasing after this woman that is pretty much flirting, but doesn't seem interested really. He doesn't have a relationship with his daughter, and throughout the course of the film, he tries to rebuild that relationship and does the best that he can. But ultimately, he has nothing. All he has is what he used to be. And when he gets a chance to be that again, he sacrifices everything that he has for that, including his daughter. He misses that. He misses the day that he sets up with her, and that's because his ring persona, has success meeting a woman and going out with her, and he does a bunch of drugs and gets drunk and has sex with this woman instead of meeting up with his daughter. And we just get the picture that this is what he's done his whole life, and he doesn't know how to change. I really do think that in the end of the movie, there is no redemption for him, and he knows there's no redemption for him. And whether you want to take it for symbolism or not, his jumping off the ring at the end of the film and possible death, even if he doesn't die there, it's symbolic of he's gotten to the point of he's willing to sacrifice everything.
And that's what I took away too. I mean, he does try. We do see him making efforts, and obviously it was basically next to being too late, and then it was too late to reconnect with his daughter, Stephanie, played by Evan Rachel Wood. He does try to reestablish that relationship when his superficial, so to speak, audience family is no longer there, when he has this heart condition, a heart attack, a severe one, and it makes the attempt to retire from that life and go toward the real one. He does make an effort to reconnect with her. He does try to work a real job at a grocery store where he is perpetually and constantly degraded and verbally maligned. He does try to formulate an actual relationship with Cassidy, or Pamela, at the club where previously he had just gone as a customer, and they have this chemistry, which he then tries to perpetuate outside the club where she works. So he does try, and watching somebody who is making an effort and who has given up their life wherein they did have a family, as superficial and as created as it was, and for those efforts failing, basically on all fronts, of course he went back. It made perfect sense to me. And that feeling of connection, of having value, of having worth, we all want that. That's a very human experience, and we can all relate to that to some degree. Would you be willing to die for it? That is the question. He was, but it fit within the framework of his character, because he had been taking a literal beating on his physical body the entirety of that profession. That's what he did. He was a wrestler. So it fit in his character to end it that way, and end on the note of feeling valued and within your community, your created community. It's such a great film.
It is. I really like it. And I do remember now that I thought of a new question, a new angle for this. And so it's not a fully fleshed out idea, but I was thinking, is this movie partially about legacy? And is it partially about how really we have nothing to give each other than our, like, not even well, let me restart. His legacy is that he's this wrestler and he has success within that. And when he's trying to connect with his daughter, he's trying to connect with her in forget about my legacy, forget about the person I was. It just makes me think about how maybe we don't have anything, maybe legacy is made up. Maybe there's no such thing as legacy. And maybe all we really have is ourselves, because we try to think about, like, let's buy a house, let's make a job, whatever it is, let's pass something along. And do we really ever have anything to pass along? Because the thing that we do is unique to us. You know, if he's a wrestler, he's not gonna get her interested in wrestling. You know, if your dad's a farmer, he might not become a farmer. You might not have anything to pass along. And is I don't know. I think about that because of the house that we recently lost and all that. But I don't know. I think there's kind of something there.
Well, and this goes into a whole existential element of it too, because okay, you left a legacy, but you're dead, so you're not around to enjoy that necessarily. And I believe in the afterlife. I believe that we come back and maybe even are able to view during our transitional period those people in our circle and or our family. We're able to visit them now and then. And so maybe it does matter, but legacy, when you're no longer around to experience said legacy, that's a whole other philosophical topic. But it made sense to me because of Randy's character and who he was, that he chose to end it that way. I can't say that until you're in that position how far you would go, but to feel valued and to feel like you're part of a community. There are many, many people throughout history who have sacrificed themselves for that feeling, and it's not a leap for me to envision being in the same shoes and in the same position and perhaps making a similar choice.
There's certainly a little sub message of chosen family here in the film. Like, and we see his partnership and brotherhood with the fellow wrestlers and how much they respect him and how much he loves just being in that room with them. And I mean, it's an interesting movie because I mean, obviously we're emotionally attaching ourselves to the main character, but it's interesting to say I would make the same choice. You know, I'm literally saying in this movie I would die, but I would make the same choice as him. The choice is pretty clear. It's this choice between people who absolutely adore you and other people who basically either hate you or couldn't care less about you at all. And a life of pain and suffering versus a life of glamour and money and fame. And I mean, I think that that's why the movie works, is like if we can identify and if we can connect to a character who makes, by all accounts, an irrational decision, then in my opinion, that's a masterfully done film. That's like what makes a masterpiece stand out, is if you can connect to someone who does something that you would never do, but in their shoes, it's painted in a way where you have no choice but to say, like, yeah, that's what I would do too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it initially, when you go into a performative job like that, whether it's, well, stand-up comedy, I don't have experience with, and so I can't really speak to that. But when you go into a performative job, let's say hostessing or being a professional wrestler, initially, sure, it's about the money, it's about the sort of the recognition that you're getting for your appearance or your abilities. But over time, as your characters converge and overlap, it becomes about the connection that you have with that audience, about your makeshift family. And if you're lacking that in your so-called real life, what's the point of hanging on to it? So it becomes, at the end of the day, it gravitates and returns and cycles back to this very human foundational experience of having connection and having a community, having validation, and how far will you go to hold on to that? And some of us will go pretty far.
Yeah, for sure. There's also like a little bit of the delayed childhood or just the immature person kind of viewpoint in this. You know, here's somebody who is closer to the little boys that live in the trailer park than he is to an adult woman. And he does this very, it's obviously an adult job, but it's something that at the time at least was more for kids, and it's very make believe. And there's sort of this idea of like, did this guy ever really grow up? Is he just a big kid? you know, and I think that that's also, at least I think from the perspective of like a male in his near middle age, I see that in this character a little bit of like, this guy is just a big kid. He might be an adult. He's older in the film than I am, but in a lot of ways, he's just like a toddler who doesn't understand what life really is and doesn't really know how he fits into it. And he's just doing this thing. He's playing make believe with his friends, and that's what he's always done. But when he has to punch a time clock, and when he has to show other people respect, and when he has to hold down a 9 to 5, he has no idea how to do that. He has no idea how to live in the real world. All he knows how to do is jump off a top rope and make it look fun for all of his buddies. He doesn't know how to, you know, have a job per se.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because there is this sense, I mentioned it before, but this element of the rest of the world kind of moving on without you as you continue playing make believe. And in my case, it was the process of dressing up to go to work and making sure that your hair is teased and adopting a club name and being and willfully and willingly objectifying yourself. I do think that, again, there is a certain personality type along with the other points I mentioned, the kinds of people who gravitate to those kinds of jobs. But another component, in addition to the previous ones, is this element of perhaps it's a trauma response. And so people of whom, for whatever reason, are still very childlike in nature and want to play dress up and basically play as your job. Well, that isn't appealing for everybody, or else more people would do it. And so I had that in addition in common with him as well, because that was very much my experience too. And as you maintain this sort of childlike playing demeanor, the rest of the adult world, well, it moves along and you don't, to a degree. And then when you try, it can be very difficult to assimilate.
Yeah, this character has no way to assimilate. And yeah, I mean, the world of stand-up comedy, I mean, it's not like I have that much experience with it, but the world of that is full of people who are just big children who just, want to go tell jokes with their friends and hang out with, it's also full of like just stoners and that kind of a crowd too. People who don't want to grow up, people who just want to go have fun. And there's a lot of, similarities between his actual death scare and his experience with the job. These are both two things that happen that suddenly shake him into the real world. And they say, you can't just do this forever. You can't just, this is going to lead you towards either death or disassociation from reality. And so that's why the end, I think, is really poignant, because if it is taken literally, then it is both of those, death being a disassociation from reality. But if we follow through on pursuing the thing that is ultimately fake, then we are choosing to ignore reality and indeed our lives. So we might as well essentially die. I think that's kind of a dark take on the movie, but but I think that that's kind of what it's saying. It's like you have to wake up, you have to be in reality, otherwise you're just gonna miss it, and you might die. You might as well die.
And or time will eventually force you to move on. I mean, you will get older, and when you are a sports star, or Pamela too, she was Pamela Cassidy, she was dealing with basically the same experience. She was getting older and getting shunned for the younger girls, and we saw that blatantly at the beginning of the film. And it's terrifying if that's all you have been doing and you were once so good at it, and then your body, despite your best efforts, cannot do it anymore. Eventually, nature and biology will force you to move on. So good luck.
Yeah, really.
That to happen, because if you do it for long enough, ultimately it will. What did you, speaking of Cassidy, I'll just call her Cassidy, that was her real name. What did you think of her performance? Her real name in the film. What did you think of her performance and what she brought to the movie?
I thought it was really good. It's the kind of writing that I really like, where it's not like she sits there and tells us her backstory. There's not a moment where we learn everything about her, but we learn enough to extrapolate and to kind of fill in the missing pieces ourselves. And I really appreciate scripts that don't sit you down and tell you, where she grew up and why she's like this and when she had her kid and who the father was. I don't need to know all that. I can fill that all in my head. So it's a well-written piece, and I think it's really well acted. And I think that she is really charming, and I think that their chemistry is really good. And I think that the end, I don't particularly love. I mean, we've spoiled this movie enough already, so I don't love that she drives to his show and is there and maybe even watches him die. I think that's probably one part of the movie that I just don't I don't know if I need it, I guess. Um, but altogether, I really like her, and I really like Marissa Tomei, and I think it's the perfect character to align with Randy. What about you?
Yeah, first of all, it's ticking in my head that I need to correct that. Cassidy was her stage name. I believe her real name was Pamela or Pam. So Cassidy. Cassidy, again, without knowing, yeah, I agree, without knowing a lot of her backstory, that's the hallmark of a really good actor or actress, when without a lot of fill-ins and information, they're able to really, nonetheless, and regardless, give a really convincing, moving performance. And I think she did a really good job. I think she complemented Randy's character very well. Obviously, naturally, they understand each other better than if she had another type of position or profession. They had this natural understanding because they both had these performative jobs. They were both dealing with aging. They both had a child. And their chemistry, like you said, their chemistry worked really well. And for her to be able to elicit sympathy for her position, without us really knowing a lot about her and her history and her life outside the club, she did a really good job. I thought Evan Rachel Wood's character Stephanie was much more one-dimensional. Were you impressed?
No, not really. Yeah, it's interesting because you have those two characters that are probably given as much information, being Pamela Cassidy and then Stephanie. It's not like we're given a lot more information about Stephanie, but the character is intentionally written not as likable, but also I just don't think the performance is as good. There's not the levels of nuance. And that's also, again, that's in the writing, because she's very much written to just be like an angry young woman who is, you know, almost intentionally lashing out against this returning father. And I don't know if I really need as much about her as we're given. I think that especially the scene where he goes to her house and meets Stephanie's girlfriend and all that. I feel like it's almost intentionally trying to make their relationship have diametrically opposed viewpoints a little bit too much. I think it's like it's kind of piling on things that don't need to be there. But I also think that the performance is just not as good. And I assume that you think the same.
Yes, I agree. I've seen her in other roles and been more impressed. Part of it too, maybe my own personal opinions about Evan Rachel Wood's behavior as of the past couple of years is maybe filtering into my disdain. But the character I think was a bit flat, even though she did portray a lot of emotionality and outbursts, and I think that's all I have to exclaim about about it. Do you have what other characters were even in the movie? We had just minor characters aside from that little group of three, correct?
Yeah, he has some wrestler buddies and he has like the kids in the RV park. His boss at the grocery store is probably the next biggest character, which is oddly enough played by comedian Todd Barry. I'm sure that there's a weird backstory behind that, but I think that he's probably my third or fourth favorite character in the movie. I love that guy. But there's not a lot of characters. It's very insular and it's very, focused, and it's also that kind of trademark Aronofsky handheld cam that's sort of documentary feeling, following around Randy and getting into the car with him or following behind him as he walks down the road or something. It's a very singularly focused film, and I like that about it. I like movies that have a minimalistic approach because I think that that's just a really interesting writing challenge. I really enjoy movies that have like one setting or one room or one character even. But yeah, I don't think there's really anyone else to talk about.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. What is his name? That actor's name? He's a comedian.
Todd Barry.
Yeah, I liked his character too. I think he played the small part that it was perfectly. Do I have to wear this name tag? No, you're special.
Yeah.
Snippets like that, it just gives enough salt and bite to the movie to do its job very well. Well, aside from the numerous points that we brought up, do you have any final thoughts about this film?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think we touched on everything. I do think that you like it more than me. I think that on a rating scale, I would put this like probably around like a 7.5 or so. It's not one that I am gonna rewatch a lot. I think that I have a difficulty like explaining what about this movie I don't like, but I think it comes down to just altogether I'm like, okay. I feel like it's not just that I know how the movie's going to end from kind of like 4 or 10 minutes in. It's more just like I don't really know why I'm supposed to care beyond, just like here's here's a story about a person and you should care. But it's not a bad movie. It's just that I sort of don't really connect to it, even though there's these themes in it. So I'm going to give it a 7.5. And yeah, do you have any final thoughts? And what is your score?
So I would probably give it around an 8.5. Um, I could empathize with Cassidy's role, Randy's role. I thought that it was engaging and just deeply moving, a very human movie to watch, which, especially for somebody who's maybe in a transitional period, trying to reconnect with a family member, going between jobs, maybe entering midlife, it can be applicable on many different levels. Primarily, I thought Mickey Rourke just gave a outstanding performance, and I wish him all the best. Like you said, I haven't seen him in anything since then. I think he's done a couple projects, but that might have been his last shot to really gain like an actual award for that performance, and he did not. But he did in my book. So there.
Right. I'm almost tempted to, like, you know what? Maybe in the comments section below, I'll put down who won the Academy Award in 2008. And if people want to like go to bat for why Mickey Rourke should have won, then I'm willing to listen to it. I think that'd be interesting. So write down in their comments about like who won and who was nominated, and we'll see if Mickey Rourke should have won.
Just really quickly, what are your feelings about Sean Penn having won for Milk the same year?
Oh, that is who won?
I believe so.
Oh, okay. I've never seen it, but I think Sean Penn, I think he can be good. He's another actor who's kind of fallen off the map completely. I don't even know the last movie that I saw him in, but around this time he was having a big resurgence, and that would make sense. I never saw Milk. I'm a big fan of Gus Van Sant, though. I like that director, and I'm not a completionist, obviously, but yeah, did you see Milk? And do you have any Sean Penn thoughts?
I don't like him as an actor. I've seen him in Milk one time. I saw him in I Am Sam.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a widespread reaction there, not just me. And I saw him when he was a very young lad in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which we should discuss that movie one time because it's very difficult for me to be perturbed by a film. And for various reasons, that one did it. And he was in it. He played one of the long-haired skater stoner characters in that movie. So 3 out of 3. I can't speak to having been impressed or appreciable of his performances.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that I haven't seen most of the stuff that he's known for. And I definitely haven't seen, I think it was Mystic River was a big one for him, and I never saw Milk, and I never saw, I mean, the things I've seen with him are like Thin Red Line, and I mean, I don't know. I'd have to do some digging to even remember, but yeah, I mean, if that's who won instead, then that kind of goes to my point of like people aren't even talking about that movie anymore. I don't think that that could have that needed to be the winner over Mickey Rourke.
I agree. Well, I would give it an 8.5. The reason I say that is just that there are other movies which are also my favorites, which maybe just comparatively, I mean, it's difficult to, there was nothing wrong with The Wrestler. Nothing I think it could have done better. It's just that I have such a wide array of movies that are my favorites and might even score a higher rating. So I'm sort of stuck at giving it an 8.5, which is still a pretty good score, but perhaps in time that will change.
Yeah. So we're not gonna announce what we're gonna do next week. Maybe I'll put it down below again. But we're trying to decide. What'd you say?
We'll take your vote.
Yeah. Sound off, you know.
Now's your chance. Now's the time.
But yeah, this has been Hipsterless Hangouts. I guess that's it. Parting thoughts, anything else?
Don't be a hipster, but do hang out. Doodaloo.
Yeah, that's our ending now.